I live on Long Island for about half of the year, and the other half here. I am married, I am a mother, I am a grandmother, and I was a teacher for about 40 years. If anybody is a new attendee today and has come here today for the first time, would you like to identify yourself and tell us where you're from or where you live? Everybody is a repeat customer? No. Okay, Lauren?
Okay, I'm Lauren Sharp. I live in Senegal. I've been here about 12 years. I haven't been to this meeting probably because I'm not a morning person. It takes a lot to get me going in the morning. I used to work in higher education as vice president and dean, and the meetings I've gone to of this, the free thinkers and the philosophy club, all the topics have been wonderful, and I presented it good, so I wanted to get more involved, and I forgot.
Sounds good. Thank you, Lauren. Anyone else? Yes? Oh, okay, good idea. That's Michelle.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dixler. I live in Monroe, New York. I'm visiting my friend Maxine this past week and having a lovely time. I've worked as an educator, as a job developer, a event planner, and various other things. And it's nice to be here. Thank you all for the lovely weather this week.
You're welcome.
Thank you for bringing it. Thank you for being here.
Okay, anybody else? New? Now, if you would like to be on our email list so that you can get advance notice of upcoming meetings, there is a sign-up sheet on the back table. Also on the back table, there is a sheet that summarizes, the mission of the Humanists, what humanism means, and also the free thinkers. So those two things are on the back table. I'm going to suggest that everybody silence their cell phone so that it doesn't make any noise for two reasons. One, so that you don't interrupt the speaker, and also so that you don't embarrass yourself if it goes off and everybody turns their head to look at you. Okay. I'd like to thank Pam and Roz for bringing the snacks today. There are extra special snacks that will be distributed after her talk when everybody is talking amongst themselves at their tables. So thank you for that, Roz and Pam. The snacks are not provided by the rec centers or the villages. So everything you see and everything you're using, like the cups, the napkins, the plates, the sugar, the creamer, the stirrers, etc., is all paid by us. Okay, now, does anybody have announcements? I know that Jim Lorette does have an announcement.
Thank you, Karen. And by the way, I counted 84 people, maybe 86 today, which is really great. My name is Jim Loren. I'm also a member of the board of the Humanist Club. And I have two announcements. One is there is a conference in Orlando in March 14th and 15th. It's called Free Flow, F-R-E-E-F-L-O, no W. You can Google it, Free Flow Orlando. They're going to have 2 days of talented speakers and panels from the humanism, the free thinking community, the atheist community, and so forth. So I know Jim Bucko and I are signed up. If anyone else is interested, let us know. Maybe we can carpool. I'll just be driving down each day. But if you like, you can. There's different levels you can sign up for. So, I think it's $139 for the basic conference. But if you like the dinners and the parties and the other activities and the hotel, that's extra. Secondly, I do have some speaking gigs coming up. If anyone is interested. On February 13th with the Skill Club, which is at Lake Leona at 2 p.m., I'm going to be doing Should We Send Humans to Mars? That would be interesting. For the Philosophy Club, which is also at Lake Leona on February 14th, the very next day, 4 p.m., The Case for Nuclear Energy in the United States. I'm a big nuke fan. And on February 24th for the Civil Discourse Club, I'm going to be repeating my presentation on capital punishment in the USA, which is, that's going to be 10 o'clock at the Savannah Center. So there's, not only is that a controversial topic, there's a lot of headlines in the news in the last month regarding it. Thank you, Karen.
Okay, thank you, Jim. I like the way you have your notes so compact on your little phone. I'm not that tech savvy, so I have to write everything out and love pen and paper.
No, I don't do
my
paper.
way. Now, some coming attractions. For this club, the Humanist Club, next Sunday, which is February 16th, Rod Broga will be presenting What a Way to Go, Options After the End of Life. I hope he has some good options, because the two right now, I'm not crazy about either one. Okay. Then on February 23rd, we have what we call our poolside chat. It is outside by the pool. We chat. We may discuss past meetings that we want to pursue further, or any other topic that anybody wants to bring up. So that starts at 10 o'clock outside by the pool. If the weather is bad for some reason, then it would be indoors here. Now for the freethinkers, on February 13th, Robert Altabello at Bridgeport at 2:30 is presenting Philosophers Who Really Matter and Their Enduring Contributions to Western Civilization. Then on Feb 27, Jim Laurent, who you just heard from, at Bridgeport at 2:30 in the afternoon, will be presenting Can We Mine Asteroids? Now, here's something I want you to think about. Pickpocketing is wrong on I almost screwed it up. Pickpocketing on an elevator is wrong on so many levels. Okay. The presentation is just that. Israel and Palestine, conflict between cousins, is a solution even possible? Now, Roz Sherman was a high school history teacher, and she specialized in world cultures and European history. Her subject today is both an important and timely topic. Following her presentation, I will go around the room, and anybody that wants to ask her a question will be able to do so. So, Roz, you have the floor.
For those of you, can you hear me?
Yes.
For those of you that were here last week, you heard a wonderful discussion and talk on philosophy, the philosophy of Stoicism. And I have a philosophy too, and my philosophy is, if you feed them, they will come. So I brought snacks. We will have hummus to snack on in honor of the Middle East and have a discussion. Okay.
Page down.
Okay. I would like to say that my talk is in memory of Jay Kaplan, who for many years was one of the leaders of this organization. I miss him very much, and I'm sure everybody else does too. At every meeting, Jay told jokes to make us smile, no matter how serious the topic is. And so I am going to follow along with that. Some of his weren't funny. I hope you will enjoy mine a little more. Okay. The first couple have to do with food. Why do peanuts float in a regular Coke and sink in a Diet Coke? And that is absolutely true. You can try it. I used to eat a lot of natural foods until I learned that most people die of natural causes. disease did cured ham actually have? If corn oil is made from corn and vegetable oil is made from vegetables, what is baby oil made from? I have one more. Remember, this is a joke. Don't take it seriously. A worldwide survey was conducted by the United Nations. The only question asked was, would you please give your honest opinion about solutions to the food shortage in the rest of the world? The survey was a huge failure. In Africa, they didn't know what food meant. In Eastern Europe, they didn't know what honest meant. In Western Europe, they didn't know what shortage meant. In China, they didn't know what opinion meant. In the Middle East, they didn't know what solution meant. In South America, they didn't know what please meant. And in the USA, they didn't know what the rest of the world meant. So, humor. Okay. Just so we're focused on the part of the world that we're talking about, the term Fertile Crescent is sometimes used in relation to the Middle East. It is strictly a geographic term, has nothing to do with a specific people, a specific nation. It is just that dark, what do you call that thing they throw? Boomerang, thank you. Boomerang shape going from all the way down here in Arabia, all the way across and down to the Nile River. And as I said, it's strictly a geographic term, does not apply to any country, political region, anything like that. And then there is another term called the Levant. You may have heard that term used. It comes from the French word lever, which means to rise, because it was the east, and the sun rises in the east. Again, it is strictly a geographic term. It encompasses some, but not all, of the Fertile Crescent. Some people include Egypt, some people include Cyprus, but it's mainly that area that we now call the Middle East. The objectives of my presentation are to show that the Jewish people and the Palestinian people are actually closely related. The evidence that I'm going to present to you comes from geopolitical and historical records, genetic research, very recent current genetic research from the last 20 or 25 years, and linguistics. The source of a lot of the conflict between Jews and Palestinians is over who came here first. Who are the indigenous people that belong on the land? And my hypothesis is that both of them are indigenous people because they both are the same people. According to the Bible, which is probably not fact, all the area west of the Jordan River up to the Mediterranean Sea was known as Canaan or Canaan before Joshua took the 12 tribes from Egypt and conquered that land. You could see from the map that the Middle East, the Levant, whatever you want to call it, is a very strategic location between the great empires from the Babylonian side, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the great Egyptian empires. This area is right in between, and therefore, as President Trump would say, it is prime real estate. And it was fought over many centuries. The word Palestine actually comes from the word Philistine. So historically, and according to the Bible, the Palestinians are the Philistines. But no one uses the word Palestinian that way today for a lot of different reasons. The most important of which is that the Philistines disappeared about 600 years BC. And just, we have no record of them after that period. Herodotus and other classical writers first used the term Palestine as a designation for southern Syria, the region north of Egypt, which the Bible calls Canaan. If you believe the story of Abraham, according to the Bible, he started somewhere around here, Ur, the city of Ur, which has been excavated and did exist. And he and his flocks and his people traveled up the river and then came down to what we now call Palestine/Israel. And he called it Canaan. When he got there, it was the land of Canaan. It wasn't Palestine. This map is from a little bit later and shows you the kingdoms of David and Solomon. David had a much smaller kingdom, and Solomon greatly enlarged it. And you can see here, this is Philistia. And this is the original home of the Philistines that came to be known as Palestine. Up at the top is Phoenicia. And they are also people that sort of disappeared in time. The Egyptians call them the sea people because we think that they came from somewhere on the northern side of the Mediterranean Sea, the European side, possibly from Crete, the island of Crete. But that's the area where they settled, and long ago disappeared into history. The word Palestine is not in the Bible. It is not in the Quran. It is not in any of the writings that came after the Quran. One of the ironies of the Arab-Israeli dispute over, quote, Palestine, is the often neglected fact that there is no term Palestine in the Muslim or Arab tradition or in the Jewish tradition. In a minute, I will show you a very broad history of what happened to the Middle East over the last more than 2,000 years. But basically, the area that's covered in is the area that was off and on controlled by the Roman Empire for a number of centuries. At the end, it was divided up between Herod and his sons, and this is historical evidence. It's in the New Testament of the Bible, but there are historical records for it. It was known as the Land of Israel. It was known as, well, Jews refer to it as Zion, which is a name, a very ancient name for the city of Jerusalem. Jesus referred to it as Judea. It was not Israel, it was not Palestine, it was Judea. The English word Jew, of course, comes from the name Judah and Judea, the land of the Jews. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that there has never been a country until the 20th century, never been a country called Palestine. The use of the word Palestine is an ethnic distinction that did not begin until the 20th century. The word actually comes from the Latin word Palestina, and it is the name given to the region by the Roman Emperor Hadrian in 135 AD, after he suppressed what was known as the Bar Kokhba rebellion, a Jewish rebellion against Roman control. Formerly, the area had been known as Judea, but Hadrian wanted to humiliate the Jews and erase any connection that the Jews had with this land. And so he is the one that began to name the area Palestina for the ancient inhabitants of that area. As you can see from this list, Palestine was never an independent country. It was always a province of a larger district, usually known as Syria. This was true throughout most of history until the 20th century. The ironic aspect of the problem that we have today is that until the 20th century, all people who lived in this area were referred to as Palestinians. And there were Jewish Palestinians, there were Christian Palestinians, there were Muslim Palestinians, and there was no association with religion at all. It was just that region that the Romans named Philistia. Now this, I don't know how easy it is for you to see, but let's just take a quick look through the last 2,000 years of history. Number one, we're talking about the creation of the Jewish state, which would be the biblical When Joshua came from Egypt with the 12 tribes and conquered all the people that were living in Canaan and created a Jewish state. Then a few hundred years later, that state fell to the Assyrians, and the two regions, northern and southern, the northern area fell to the Assyrians first, and then the southern area, called Judah, was conquered by the Babylonians. The Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. The Persians were conquered by the Hellenist Greeks under Alexander. Then the Jewish state freed itself from the Greek Empire briefly, created an independent state, which then fell to the Roman Empire. They freed themselves from the Roman Empire. It was reconquered by the Roman Empire. Then the Palmyrene Empire, which I had never heard of until this week, was an Assyrian empire that came from the area of the Tigris and Euphrates. That was reconquered by the Roman Empire. Then the Sasanian Empire reconquered Palestine. Then came the Muslim conquest. In the 7th century, the armies of Islam came sweeping out of Arabia and conquered virtually the whole area that we call the Fertile Crescent. There was one Muslim caliphate after another. For a few hundred years, there was a Christian Byzantine Empire that was overthrown by one of the Muslim caliphates, and then another Muslim caliphate, and then another Muslim caliphate, and then another Muslim caliphate. And then in the 12th century, very briefly, what we call Palestine, or the Holy Land, was taken over by the Christian Crusaders, who were trying to take the Holy Land back for Christianity. That didn't last very long. The Seleucid Turks conquered the Crusaders, and then the Mamluks conquered the Seleucids, and finally the Ottomans took over the Mamluks until World War I. There was an Ottoman Empire until World War I. At the end of World War I, they happened to be on the wrong side of the war, and the British and French took over the Ottoman Empire. As you can see from this list, there is no Palestine, no independent Palestine, no independent Jewish state. And that's really the point that I'm trying to make. The land has been taken over and over and over and over again by people that came from everywhere. The population, I read one source that says the population of what we call Palestine has been almost entirely replaced at least a dozen times. So they conquered, they cleared out the population, they brought in new people, they were taken over, cleared out the population, brought in new people, and it happened over and over and over again. In addition to that, there were little things like the Black Plague, which helped to wipe out substantial portions of the population that lived in Palestine. And so the people who call themselves Jews, the people who call themselves Palestinians, are the result of all of that conflict over thousands of years. Doesn't want to move. There we go. Okay. This map shows you the height of the Muslim empire, the Islamic empire. And you can see that it was one of the largest in the history of the world. It went all the way from parts of India, there's my pointer, from parts of India all across this, what is now Russia, Crimea, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, the whole Arabian Peninsula, the whole Levant, all the way across Egypt and up into Spain. The whole southern half of Spain was under Muslim control for several centuries. In the Islamic worldview, the concept is that once a region is taken over by Muslims and dedicated to Allah, that it can never be taken back by anybody else. Once it belongs to Allah, it always belongs to Allah, and all of it. And that includes Palestine in its entirety. They believe that Christians and Jews betrayed Allah when they refused to become followers of Muhammad. Moses was a great prophet, but not the end of the line. Jesus was a great prophet, but not the end of the line. Muhammad was the end of the line. And anybody who did not accept Muhammad was a non-believer and could live in Muslim territory as a second-class citizen and pay a special tax and have much fewer rights than Muslims did, but it was okay for them to live there as long as it was a Muslim region. They believed that Jews and Christians betrayed Allah when they refused to become followers of Muhammad. Their punishment was to be expelled from their lands, and all their land would be taken over by Muslims forever. They believed that the structure that was built on the mount in Jerusalem was not a temple, that it was actually a mosque. The fact that it was built 1,000 years before the Islamic religion was even created is something that they don't talk about in great detail. But in fact, there is a 1,500-year gap between when the temple was built and when the religion of Islam was created. Jews and Christians can be protected under Muslim law, but they will never be equal citizens, and they can never actually own the land. As long as Jews were willing to accept that and live under Muslim rule, there was very little conflict between them. conflict, I mean that they were swapping people back and forth over the centuries, and I will show that to you genetically in a couple of minutes. Oh, it's getting late. It is known among many Islamic families that live in that region of Palestine that there are oral traditions that they actually are descended from Jews that converted. There are some groups in certain parts of that land who put the Star of David over their doorways, and they light candles on Friday night. The town of Yatta, near Hebron, is one of those communities where clearly the Arabs, Muslims, are descendants of Jews. In fact, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PLO, Palestinian territories, is known to his father, descended from one of the rabbinic families in the town of Sfat, which is a very well-known community of both Arabs and Jews in what is now Israel. Oops. In 1837, there was a major earthquake in that region, including Sfat, and many of the residents fled, although some stayed. The majority who stayed were Muslims, and the Jews that remained were forced to convert to Islam, and that included his ancestors, Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian territory, and it is well known among the families from that area that he comes from a Jewish background. In fact, one source that I read said that Yasser Arafat, when he got angry, lost his temper with Abbas, would yell at him, "Anta Yehudi, you are a Jew." So that it was common knowledge that there were some Palestinians who came from Jewish sources. Okay. This was a problem for 1,000 years. Jews were expelled from all the countries of Europe over and over and over and over again. You can see that some of the arrows point down towards the Fertile Crescent. A lot of Jews found safety living in North Africa and the Middle East under Muslim rule, as long as they were second-class citizens and accepted that and paid the tax. I'm not going to go through all of this. This is just a written version of the map that you just saw. How over and over and over again, over centuries, the Jews were expelled from all over Europe. All the way to the 20th century. Notice in 1862, in Tennessee, Mississippi, and Kentucky, Jews were expelled by Ulysses Grant. That was General Order Number 11 from the U.S. military. What happened was that eventually many of these Jews found their way to the Middle East and became a substantial part of the population. And that's when the trouble started. They were accepted by the Muslims until the two groups became so large that they came into conflict with each other. They were fighting over the land, who owned the property. They were fighting over who had the rights to the land, who lived there the longest. And as the population of Jews increased, it became a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. Notice this is the whole region of the Ottoman Empire from the Middle East. You can see that the Ottomans divided it into states, but nowhere does it say Palestine, nowhere does it say Israel or Judea. Those words just didn't exist. It was considered Syria. This was a Sykes-Picot agreement in the middle of World War I. The French and the English thought that when the war was over, they would just take the Ottoman Empire and split it among themselves. And so you can see the gold Armenia was given to Russia, and everything else in the Fertile Crescent was divided between the French and the English. That was an idea whose time never came. Eventually, the British mandated Palestine in 1948. The United Nations decided to divide Palestine into two states. The striped area is the Emirate of Transjordan. The purple area is what the British ruled until 1948. The idea being that eventually that purple area would be divided between Jews and Muslims. Now you see the onslaught of what happened in World War II to the Jews. 8 million killed during World War II from 1933 to 1945, before, during, and after. Many of the remnants went to Palestine, and that created a situation that the Muslims just could not tolerate. This shows you the UN partition plan in 1947, where the UN divided Palestine into an Arab state, the green, and the Jewish state, the blue, and the city of Jerusalem would be under international control. It was a good idea, but it was never implemented. What happened was that war broke out, and war has continued to break out and break out and break out. 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, going all the way up to the current war in Gaza, over and over again. The Jews believe that this is the Holy Land that was given to them by God, and there are many, many, many references to that in the Bible, both the Old and New Testament. The Muslims believe that once the land is Muslim land, it's always Muslim land, and nobody else is going to rule over it but Muslims. And so you have two conflicting ideologies that don't work. They just don't work. Okay, on to the genetic research. Most of what I read I didn't understand, so I only have a couple of slides. If these numbers mean anything to you, it compares Jews from different parts of the world, Kurdish Jews, Sephardic Jews, meaning those that came from Spain when they were expelled in 1492, the Ashkenazi Jews, the Eastern European Jews that lived in Poland and Russia for centuries, the Palestinian Arabs, and the Bedouins. And the bottom line is that 70% of Jewish men and half of Arab men whose DNA was studied, their Y chromosomes came from the same paternal ancestors who lived in the region, presumably Canaanites, Philistines, and whoever came after them over and over and over again. Jews and Palestinians are very related genetically. Some of it is due to the fact that Jews were forced to convert to Islam when it was Islamic territory. In other places, in other times, Arabs were forced to convert to Judaism. This is where the DNA is. This is Yemenite, this is Jews, this is Palestinian, this is Lebanese, Syrian, Kurdish. They're all in the same group. It's basically the same DNA. They also compared the DNA of Palestinian Arabs and Jews with Canaanite skeletons, or what they believe to be Canaanite skeletons, from 2,000 years ago, and they found a deep genetic connection of many Jewish groups today and many Arab groups today to those people thousands of years ago. There have been a huge number of genetic studies done over the from the late 90s on, showing that genetically we are talking about the same people. What they studied was the Y chromosomes of men. I'm not sure why, but they looked at the Y chromosomes haplotypes. If anybody knows what that means. That is the genetic material that is passed from father to son. And what it revealed was that Arabs and Jews are essentially a single population, and that Palestinians, well, as you can see there, they are identical to the Jews, but depending on where they lived, there is some mixture of other people. Some Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews, are mixed with some Eastern Europeans. Sephardic Jews are mixed with some Spanish people. Palestinians, depending on Arabs, what area they came from, are mixed with other people. But basically, genetically, they are the same. One thing that I thought was very interesting, and I'm just about finished, was that they found that the group that were closest to the Palestinians were the Lebanese. And the modern Lebanese, their chromosomes are something like 90% descended from Canaanites. And so if Palestinians want to say that they descended from Canaanites, then the Holy Land is Lebanon and not the Middle East. Go on again. I'm almost done. It's very interesting that many Palestinians have last names that describe where they came from. And they call themselves Palestinians, but in fact, their last name is Al-Masri, which means from Egypt, or Al-Halabi, which means from Aleppo, Syria, or Al-Turki, which means from Turkey, or Al-Yamani, which means from Yemen, Al-Kurdi, which means from the Kurdish region, Al-Quds, which means from Jerusalem, Al-Tunisi, from Tunis, and so on and so on and so on. Those are very common names of people who call themselves Palestinians. Okay, my last point is linguistics, and there's not much to say about that, except that Arabic and Hebrew are very similar languages. They are both derived from the same ancient Semitic language family. Their phonetics are very similar. Their root systems are very similar. The syntax, the vocabulary, the alphabet, the vocabulary, I think I mentioned that, is all very, very similar. So, what are we talking about here? The conflict. How many handshakes have there been over the last 30 or 40 years between Arab leaders, Palestinian leaders, and Jewish leaders, and still we have war. Okay, I'm ending with 2 cartoons. Do you see that? Jesus in the cave with his family, and the 3 wise men describe him as a little Palestinian Jew. So, what do you say about that? And then there is our friend, Mr. Trump. He moved his last term. He moved the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and here he is telling Netanyahu, I could see a huge Trump Tower over there, and in fact his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has said that just in the last few weeks about Gaza. Look at all that wonderful beachfront area that Gaza has. We could have a Trump Tower, and a Trump Hotel, and a Trump condominium, and Trump apartments, and, you know, a Trump village. Okay, questions to think about. Based on what I've said, how similar they are, and yet, think about Jacob and Esau. Think about who were the Cain and Abel. Think about all of the conflict between families that comes from the Bible. Is there a solution? Given their mindset of both groups, is there a solution? What would it take for the conflict to end? And is there anything we on the outside, whether it's people or nations or religious groups or Is there anything that can be done to help end this conflict? The end.
I would say that was a very comprehensive, detailed presentation, and you certainly did your homework and research on that. Thank you. Now, for the question and answer time, I will go up this section and then down that section, and depending upon time, I can repeat, so you feasibly could get more than one question in. All we ask is if you feel comfortable, if you would stand, identify yourself, say what village you're in, so that we get to know one another. So starting here, Paul.
That was a wonderful, erudite presentation. Thank you for your efforts. I had heard this morning, early this morning, that Mark Morse, the Morses, Donald Trump, and Elon Musk are conversing about extending the villages to Gaza. That they're going to build a Gaza village, and Elon Musk promises to connect it with here using a rocket ship in less than an hour. So you can sign up for the new homes in the Gaza villages.
Would it be pickleball?
Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the very first events on your first slide from my studies, I think those are mythological, the idea that the Israelis were in, the Jews were in Egypt is, I don't think, supported anymore. And the idea that there was an early Jewish empire under Joshua and so forth. Also, they just arose from Canaan indigenously and made up a fancy story to glorify themselves.
Actually, there are a lot of archaeologists and historians who don't even believe that they were in large numbers in Egypt. There's absolutely no evidence of it from Egyptian sources.
The incidents never happened.
Jim, you're supposed to have the microphone to do that. Thank you, Roz. I'm Bo Goldsmith. I enjoyed your talk. The problem is actually pretty straightforward. As long as people's religious, tribal identifications dictate their world view, you will have unending conflict. Goldsmith's brief history of man is you have something that I want and I think I can take it. That's the way it has played out forever. With regard to what you were talking about with the Y chromosome similarity amongst the different
Do you understand
religious
it?
populations. Yes, ma'am.
Good. Thank you.
The problem there is that historically, as I understand it, Jewish lineage is matrilineal. So that you're Jewish if you're born from a Jewish mother. Consequently, the Y chromosome is fairly irrelevant. I remember back when I was doing genealogical studies, my mentor told me, it's a wise child that knows his parents.
One point about that, I think the reason why they chose men rather than women was because the women's chromosomes were more variable under the assumption that the women are married off to other groups and eventually mix with those groups.
Yes, you can do heritage on the male side fairly easily, more easily with the Y chromosome because it's more conserved.
The men are
variation.
more likely to stay within their group.
It's a tiny little chromosome that doesn't vary much. Okay, so that you can do patrilineal heritage fairly reliably, easily, and without involving as many good biostatisticians.
Okay, anyone else on this side? And then don't forget, we will have our small table discussion groups following this.
Hi, Howard Underwood from Amelia. Thank you for the presentation. I enjoyed it. What I'm interested in is, having done all this studying, what are your answers to those questions?
What am I?
Yeah. What are
What's
your
my
answers
solution?
to those three questions?
I take a nap.
You take the fifth.
I have been to the Middle East a number of times. I've been to Israel 5 times. I've been to Jordan. I've been to Turkey. There are some people who was it Jim who said it? Somebody. Logic, if you are logical and reasonable and, look at history, you can sit down and put together a map and solve the problem. But people who are very religious and believe in the Quran and the writings that came after the Quran, which is where a lot of this came from, and take the Bible literally, it's going to be a problem. The Bible says over and over and over again that this is the land that God gave to the Jews. Israel, Judah, and Samaria. It's their land. How do you argue with that?
Oh, yeah, I'm Bob Daggett from Ashland Village. On that graph of the how close the genes were and everything, I would mention that probably that more often than not, the people who were mixed were, like for instance, women that were captured and then raped and so forth, forced into harems and things like that. And that's where most of the mixing comes from.
No, there is, they are able to trace that, and there is some mixing over the centuries of conquest, but the DNA does show that they came from one source in the Middle East, presumably the Canaanites, and we don't know anything about them. The Egyptians called them the sea people, because they came from somewhere else in the Mediterranean, possibly Crete, but we know very little about them.
Coming from a family with 8 sisters, you say, why is there a problem? It's probably the why part. That's the mankind side. Whether or not I'm not even a Native American, we know who they are, but it was the why guys who took over this and every other civilization. So we get rid of the why part, turn it over to, instead of mankind, womankind. Maybe there's the answer.
I've heard that argument before, but I would like to remind you about Golda Meir. I would like to remind you about Indira Gandhi. There have been a number of women leaders in the 20th century who have gone to war just as much as the men.
Scott Fenstermaker from the village of Winterford. A factual point. Roz mentioned that in Muslim countries, non-Muslims under Islam's doctrine have to pay a special tax.
Correct.
The rationale for that under Islamic theology is that one of the pillars, 5 pillars of Islam, is the payment of the zakat, which is if you have wealth over a certain amount, you have to pay 2.5% of your excess wealth for the care of the poor and for other charitable purposes. Since the non-Muslims aren't paying that zakat, the theory is they have to pay this special tax to compensate for that.
Anyone in this section?
Could you put up the chart that shows the UN mandate, who voted for it, who did not vote for it, who abstained?
I don't have
You did have it.
No.
Give us a chart.
No.
That lists all of the nations that, the UN mandate from 1948.
I have a map of it, but not,
No, you actually listed the nations that, well, my point is this. That mandate is sort of forced on that area. And England did not.
oh, there you go. You're right.
England abstained from that, and that's the area, that whole area there is now, it's Palestine, and it's the nation of Israel. And that was the entire English mandate. England never voted for that. They abstained from it. You can see it right there. The United Kingdom abstained from that vote. That was forced on that particular area. And my other point is this. It seems to me this is a regional problem. A regional problem that could go global. It could go global.
Absolutely.
And it has to be solved by the whole surrounding area. All of the Arabs, including Israel, has to solve it on their own. And one last point. You didn't mention how Gaza came about. I'm not sure how Gaza came about and how some of the Palestinians moved over to there from the West Bank. I don't know how that. What's the history of Gaza itself? Was that part of Egypt? I don't know. And
the Gaza Strip is actually the land of the Palestinians.
how did it come to be? I don't understand that. Maybe you can enlighten me.
It was the area where the Philistines lived. It was always part of Judea. I don't know. Clearly, you can see here they were trying to, the UN was trying to divide the map to allow for an even mix of people, but also to keep the concentrations of people, where the concentration of Jews were, where the concentration of Arabs were. And Jerusalem would be an international city. Yeah.
The Gaza Strip was a very lightly populated area, administered by Egypt, I think until '56. And during the partition, many Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, fled Israel to avoid the war that was going on.
Yes.
And many of them fled to Gaza because it was administered by Egypt and wasn't under the control of Israel.
Thank you. That's been a huge, huge area of conflict. What happened to the Palestinians in the War of 1948? The Palestinians claimed that the IDF, the soldiers, some of whom, many of whom were survivors of the concentration camps, were very cruel in pushing them off their land. The Jews contend that their leaders, both in other countries, Arab leaders and Arab leaders in Palestine, told people to leave. They said, go get away from the fighting with your families. After all, 5 Arab countries are going to war against this brand new Jewish state. As soon as we have demolished Israel, you will be able to come back and you will get your own land and you will be able to get the Jews' land as well. So go. And many of them left voluntarily. Some of them were pushed out, forced out. How many of each, you know, it's argued back and forth, and there's no question that it happened on both sides. Many, many of them left voluntarily. They went to Jordan, they went to Egypt, they went to Syria, they went to Lebanon, and waited for the fighting to be over. the majority of the population, somewhere between half and 2/3 of the population of Jordan, are actually Palestinians.
I have a question or a comment that it seems that through history, when you have culture and religion bumping heads as drastically as they do, where each side believes they're entitled to kill the other side, I don't think we've ever come up with a way to solve that level of intransigency. And therefore, even though I'm not a Donald Trump fan by any means, I think his plan, I'll throw out there, is the most realistic. To say, pull them out of there, in the past we've done genocides and so forth, that's the only way they've handled issues like this.
That's what we call ethnic cleansing?
Yes, it would be, but yet it would be putting, in practical terms, I don't think it's ever going to work with one group in Gaza who wants to kill the other group.
Well, then let's move the Jews out.
So if there's going to be a solution, why not get drastic and I don't know. That seems to me at least that's
It can be drastic both ways.
It's not a nice thing, but it's realistic.
Okay, what we're going to do now is have our small group discussions. For those of you that are on the side, feel free to join a table where there is space or just drag a chair over.
There's lots of chairs here, or just move your chair
Yeah,
up.
no,